The day will come when, after harnessing space, the winds, the tides, and gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, we shall have discovered fire. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Welcome to Centered, Becoming Whole in a Chaotic World. This is a podcast about orientation, integration, and the lifelong work of becoming whole. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, a PhD exercise physiologist with a deep interest in the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. I return to the SPIES model as a pyramid, more specifically to the asymptote of that pyramid. An asymptote, which I will contend, is love, the idea of community, unity, and a future hope for mankind, what we call centered. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, "Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them, for it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves." I returned to the SPIES model as a pyramid. I first conceived this in a 2018 paper published in Clinical Kinesiology titled A Dynamic Systems Approach to Well-Centered Fitness. Over the years, my understanding of what I then called well-centered fitness, and now the SPIES model, has broadened and deepened significantly, particularly after being introduced to the phenomenon of man and the divine milieu, as well as other writings from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and the inspiration of numerous guests on the Aging Well podcast. We have a spiritual problem, and this podcast, Centered, Becoming Whole in a Chaotic World. What I've long labeled as an asymptote for well-centeredness has recently come to be seen more in line with what Teilhard labeled as the omega point. Though Teilhard apparently never used the term specifically, commentators have used the term amortization to describe his vision of love as a powerful force driving evolution. I find this a fitting description of the process of becoming well-centered. It is a concept that warrants further exploration as we consider transformative aging and becoming our transcendent self, and simply becoming as we seek to orient ourselves toward greater unity and wholeness. As we have learned, the SPIES model is built on the foundation of the spiritual and the physical. We have established the growing interconnectedness of these dimensions, the degree to which these are or are becoming one, that is, we are spirit matter or spirit and matter becoming spirit matter, is certainly arguable, and I don't speak in derivatives here. Leaving this to the theologists, philosophers, and scientists to reason, I am myself evolving in this understanding. I've long considered what it means to have a, quote, growth mindset, unquote. Early on, I considered growth in the areas of spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness as distinct, albeit related. This thinking has, however, evolved to where it has become better described as a, quote, growth in consciousness, end quote. I learned recently that Abraham Maslow was dissatisfied with his hierarchy of needs at the end of his life and never actually presented this as a pyramid. He is reported to have added self-transcendence as the pinnacle above self-actualization. This suggests that the ultimate level of human motivation, self-transcendence, evolves the focus from personal ego and self-actualization to a broader, selfless, other-centered purpose. Thus, the goal of well-centered fitness is connecting with nature, the cosmos, and serving others. Developing on Teilhard, we might consider that the SPIES model leads us toward directing ourselves increasingly inward and increasingly outward. Returning to the statement, I am third, we can further address the idea of the transcendent self. My God is first, my family and friends are second, and I am third. My paraphrase from Gail Sayers' I am third speaks to amorization, but requires a bit of clarification, lest one think that I am third is a completely subservient posture in life. The third self struggles to balance selfish needs. We are wired evolutionarily for survival, and selfless actions, which can fall somewhere between divine selflessness and flawed servitude. The transcendent third self steps beyond self-actualization, the knowledge of purpose, to self-transcendence, the fulfillment of purpose, where self-centeredness is essential for other-centeredness. This is often easier said than done. I know for myself, escaping the pull toward the selfish self is often overwhelming. As much as I try to be other-centered, I often find that service to others, that is, flawed servitude, can lead to frustration and resentment. Why am I doing all this when I get nothing in return? Human nature pulls us toward selfish self. Indeed, there is a need to take care of oneself. That is the SPIES model. But the goal is to transcend the selfish self and the selfless self. Maslow's self-actualization suggested the fulfillment of one's own unique potential, the mastering of one's talents, and becoming the best possible version of oneself and the ultimate need. Self-transcendence, however, is when one uses their developed potential and ego to benefit the greater good, that is purpose, with a capital P. Thus, the pinnacle of well-centered fitness is the realization that the self is most fulfilled when it integrates into a reality larger than the self, which leads us back to where our, quote, growth in consciousness, end quote, began, the spiritual dimension. As has already been presented, the spiritual and the physical are united and shape our intellectual, emotional, and social dimensions. Love is at the center, at the pinnacle. This, I believe, is why Jesus is, quote, the way, the truth, and the light. Christ, not necessarily Christianity. Returning to the asymptote, I define this focus as an asymptote because we approach this but never achieve perfection. In fact, the nearer we come to the asymptote, to self-transcendence, the further we perceive ourselves to be from it. This is the paradox of having a growth of consciousness mindset, of living what my friend Catherine Woodward Thomas, author of Conscious Uncoupling and What's True About You, 7 Steps to Move Beyond Your Painful Past and Manifest Your Brightest Future, called a generative life. So the spiritual and the physical dimensions sit at the foundation or base of the pyramid, and love, unity, community, and wholeness sits at the pinnacle. How do the intellectual, emotional, and social dimensions fit in? This is where I find Teilhard's writings so profound. I teach my exercise science students that our field is biomechanical psychosocial. Perhaps more accurately, it is more like spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, social. Not perhaps, I would argue it is. Similar to Teilhard, if I dare make any comparison, I launched this journey as an undergraduate student in geology. My path led to exercise physiology and through a convoluted journey through numerous expressions of the Christian faith. It was a path of evolution that began with the question of biological evolution and progressed toward a deeper interest in spiritual evolution. It is not my objective here to lead the reader through an exploration of Teilhard's cosmogenesis, biogenesis, anthrogenesis, psychogenesis, neurogenesis, and the ultimate convergence, Christogenesis, to the omega point. Rather, I prefer to focus on the evolution of the self, that is, the transcendence of self, through the SPIES model. The intellectual dimension of well-centered fitness sits above the spiritual, physical dimensions. If we accept that spirit and matter existed before consciousness arose in the evolution of hominins, primitive humans, we can consider that intellect is an evolutionary process. Thus, the emergence of intellect grows from the existence of consciousness. Recall that the spiritual and the physical give meaning to life and to ideas. Without a foundation in the spiritual and physical, we simply cannot develop our intellectual capability or understand the deeper concepts of our intellect. I consider the emotional dimension as a keystone that holds the other dimensions together. It is one's capacity to be reflective, to look both inward and outward. It is contemplative practices and the immersion in nature, as well as mental health care. It is the essential bridge to the social dimension, amorization, wholeness, and purpose. Central to the SPIES model is the preservation of one's individual identity in the unification of the whole. Teilhard might express this as the personalization of the universe and the universalization of the person. This is the ultimate expression of the social dimension. On the Aging Well podcast, we have 6 pillars of longevity and aging well. These include exercise and physical activity, eating a healthy diet, maintaining a healthy body composition, proper sleep hygiene, not smoking, and purposeful social engagement. Purposeful social engagement evolved from social connection when we recognized first that our relationships must be in line with our greater purpose, big P, and second, that our relationships must go deeper than mere association. We must engage with one another. While we need both connection and engagement, social connection is more the quality of the social dimension, the subjective feeling of belonging, whereas social engagement is associated with the quantity and actions of the social dimension. Purposeful social engagement is pursuant of greater community, other-centeredness, unity, and love. In the evolution of well-centered fitness, the SPIES model pyramid is ever expanding in a nonlinear sense. We begin life, as soon as conception, dependent on others, self-centered yet dependent on that which is greater than self. Our universe expands as we grow, spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially. Our universe expands and yet contracts towards the asymptote, toward the omega, or love. We are in the process of growing consciousness that is increasingly inward and increasingly outward. One might say that we have to be a self before we can deny the self. We must become the transcendent self. I no longer live, but the Messiah lives in me. And the life that I am now living in this body, I live by the faithfulness of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Galatians 2:20, International Standard Version. Thank you for listening to Centered. Please like, follow, and share with someone who can benefit. And if you'd like to support the show financially, you'll find a tip jar in the show notes.